I was 14 hours into labour when the delivery room door slammed open so hard it bounced against the wall. At first, I thought something was wrong. A nurse had just checked my contractions, and my husband, Ethan, was holding my hand while I tried to breathe through another wave of pain. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the monitor beside me beeped steadily. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Move aside. I have every right to be here." My mother-in-law, Linda, marched into the room like she owned the hospital. The nurses froze. I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had been told repeatedly that Ethan and I wanted a private delivery. We had made our wishes crystal clear for months. Yet there she stood, wearing a huge smile, holding up her phone, as if she expected front row seats to the most vulnerable moment of my life. "I'm the grandmother," she announced loudly. "Nobody is keeping me from witnessing my grandson's birth." What happened over the next few minutes left the entire medical staff speechless and changed my relationship with Linda forever. But to understand why that moment became the final straw, you need to know what had been happening long before I went into labour. The delivery room invasion didn't come out of nowhere. For nearly 2 years, I had been trying to convince myself that Linda's behaviour came from excitement, not control. Every boundary she crossed had an explanation. Every inappropriate comment had an excuse. Every uncomfortable situation somehow became my responsibility to smooth over. Ethan always said the same thing. "That's just how Mum is." But as my pregnancy progressed, her behaviour became impossible to ignore. The closer I got to giving birth, the more Linda seemed to believe that my baby belonged to her. And by the time I was lying in that hospital bed, exhausted and vulnerable, she had already crossed so many lines that I barely recognised my own life anymore. The delivery room was simply where everything finally exploded. My name is Rachel, and I was 32 when I became pregnant with my first child. Ethan and I had been married for 3 years. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, both worked full-time and had spent years building a stable life together. For the most part, our marriage was happy. The one complication was Linda. When I first met her, she seemed warm and welcoming. She brought homemade desserts to family gatherings. She hugged everyone. She constantly talked about family values. At first glance, she appeared to be the perfect mother-in-law. Looking back, I realised there were warning signs even then. Whenever Ethan spoke, Linda interrupted him. Whenever someone shared good news, she somehow redirected attention toward herself. And whenever Ethan and I made decisions as a couple, she treated them like suggestions rather than choices. Still, I genuinely tried. I invited her to dinner. I remembered birthdays. I included her in holidays. I wanted a healthy relationship. When Ethan and I announced my pregnancy, Linda cried. Not normal tears, full sobbing. She grabbed my stomach before I even had time to react. "Oh my God," she said. "My baby is having a baby." I laughed awkwardly, but something about the way she said it bothered me. My baby. Not Ethan's baby. Certainly not my baby. Her baby. Over the following months, her excitement intensified. She insisted on coming to every doctor's appointment. I politely declined. She bought furniture for a nursery in her own house. She referred to the baby as our little boy before we even knew the gender. At first, everyone treated it as harmless enthusiasm, including me. But then, little comments started slipping through. "You'll need my help because new mothers don't know what they're doing. I raised Ethan perfectly. Don't worry, I'll teach you how to care for my grandson." The comments were always delivered with a smile, yet somehow they made me feel small. When I expressed concerns to Ethan, he sighed. "Mum means well." "Maybe," I said, "but she acts like she's the parent." "You're overthinking it." I wanted to believe him. I really did, because I loved my husband, and because conflict exhausted me. So I kept trying to keep the peace. Unfortunately, Linda interpreted peace as permission, and things only got worse. Around my 5th month of pregnancy, Linda began showing up unannounced. The first time happened on a Saturday morning. I answered the door wearing pajamas. She walked right past me carrying shopping bags. I bought things for the nursery. Before I could respond, she was rearranging furniture. "Linda," I said carefully, "we already have a plan." She waved her hand dismissively. "This layout makes more sense." When Ethan came home, she had completely redesigned the room. Instead of being upset, he laughed. "Looks good, Mum." I felt invisible. Then came the baby name issue. Ethan and I had chosen a name, but kept it private. One evening during dinner, Linda announced, "I've decided his name should be Michael after my father." I smiled politely. "We already have a name." "What is it?" "We aren't sharing yet." Her expression darkened instantly. "I deserve to know." "No one deserves to know," I replied gently. "We're keeping it a surprise." For the next 3 weeks, she repeatedly pressured us, calling, texting, cornering us at family gatherings. Each refusal seemed to make her more determined. Then she started buying things with Michael embroidered on them, blankets, onesies, wall decorations, as though our decision didn't matter. The situation escalated again during my baby shower. My sister organised everything. She spent months planning. The venue looked beautiful. Halfway through the event, Linda stood up and tapped a glass. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my grandson. Not Rachel's baby, not Ethan, and Rachel's baby, her grandson." Then she spent 10 minutes giving a speech about herself. Guests exchanged awkward looks. My sister looked furious. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "Does she always do this?" I nodded. "Pretty much." As my due date approached, Linda became obsessed with access. She wanted keys to our house. We said no. She wanted to stay with us after delivery. We said no. She wanted to be the first person to hold the baby. We said no. Each answer triggered guilt trips. I guess I'm not important. I never thought my own son would treat me this way. I sacrificed everything for this family. One night she called Ethan crying for nearly an hour. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. "Can we just let her visit sooner?" he asked. I stared at him. "Ethan, that's exactly what she wants. She cries until people give in." He didn't answer, and that silence worried me more than anything. Because for the first time, I realized Linda wasn't the only problem. Ethan's inability to set boundaries was helping create the situation. And that realization became impossible to ignore as my due date arrived. 2 weeks before my due date, Linda somehow obtained a copy of my hospital information. To this day, I don't know how. One evening, she casually mentioned the hospital's name, floor number, and maternity wing. My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" she smiled. "I have my sources." I immediately called the hospital. They assured me that security measures could be added. I requested password protection and restricted visitor access. The nurse on the phone sounded understanding. "You'd be surprised how often this happens." That statement didn't comfort me. It terrified me. A few days later, Linda showed up with luggage. Actual luggage. "I'll stay here until the baby arrives." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. When I refused, she became offended. "You don't trust family? It's not about trust." "Then what is it?" I finally said the truth. "It's about boundaries." Her face hardened. For a moment, the friendly mask disappeared completely. Then she grabbed her bags and left without another word. That silence lasted 4 days. Then the texts started. Long messages, emotional messages, manipulative messages. She accused me of keeping her grandson away. She implied I was controlling Ethan. She claimed I was damaging the family. Meanwhile, my blood pressure was rising. My doctor warned me to reduce stress. Easier said than done. At 39 weeks pregnant, stress seemed unavoidable. Then, labour started. At 2 a.m, Ethan rushed me to the hospital. The contractions were intense. Everything became a blur of pain, breathing, and exhaustion. Before we left home, I reminded him, "Don't tell anyone until after the baby arrives." He nodded. "I promise." For several hours, things remained peaceful. Then, Ethan's phone started vibrating. Over and over. I knew immediately. "Did you tell her?" He hesitated. That was answer enough. My heart sank. She was going to find out eventually. "Ethan, I just sent one text." I closed my eyes. One text was all Linda needed. Within an hour, she was calling repeatedly, then texting, then demanding updates. The nurses helped us block visitors. Still, she kept pushing. At one point, she even called the maternity desk pretending to be immediate family seeking emergency information. The staff refused, but her persistence shocked everyone. By hour 12 of labour, I was emotionally drained. By hour 14, I could barely focus. I remember gripping the bed rail during a contraction when I heard commotion outside the room. Voices, footsteps, someone arguing. Then the door flew open, and Linda walked in. Everything seemed to stop. Even through the pain, I felt pure disbelief. A nurse immediately stepped forward. "Mum, you cannot be in here." Linda ignored her. She walked directly toward my bed holding her phone. I made it just in time. Ethan stood up. "Mum, what are you doing?" "What do you mean? I'm here for my grandson." I could barely process what I was hearing. Another contraction hit. I cried out. Linda actually leaned sideways, trying to get a better view. One of the nurses physically stepped between us. "Mum, you need to leave now." "No," Linda snapped. I'm family." The room fell silent. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I have more right to be here than she does. Without me, none of this family would exist." The nurse looked stunned. Ethan looked horrified. And for the first time in years, nobody rushed to excuse her behaviour. Nobody laughed it off. Nobody said she meant well. Because there was no misunderstanding. Her entitlement was fully exposed. I looked directly at Ethan. Tears filled my eyes. Not from labour, from betrayal. "Get her out." My voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. Linda looked shocked. "Rachel, don't be dramatic." That sentence changed everything. The charge nurse entered. Security followed seconds later. As Linda argued loudly, security escorted her toward the door. She kept insisting she was the grandmother, kept demanding access, kept claiming she had rights. The medical staff remained firm. The door finally closed behind her. The room became quiet again. One nurse shook her head slowly. In a career full of unusual situations, even she seemed speechless. And for me, something inside finally broke. Not my patience, not my composure, my willingness to keep accommodating someone who refused to respect me. 3 hours later, my son was born. Healthy, beautiful, perfect. For the first time all day, I felt peace. Linda wasn't allowed near the room. Security made sure of that. The next morning she began sending messages. Some angry, some emotional, some blaming me entirely. I ignored them. 2 days later, after we returned home, Ethan and I had the hardest conversation of our marriage. "I'm done," I told him. He looked confused. "Done with what?" "Being treated like I don't matter?" He sat quietly. For once, he didn't defend his mother, because he had witnessed everything firsthand. "You're right," he said softly. "It shouldn't have gotten this far." "No, it shouldn't have." A week later, Linda demanded a family meeting. I almost declined. Then I realized something. Avoiding conflict hadn't solved anything. So, we agreed. The meeting took place at our house. Linda arrived expecting sympathy. Instead, she found boundaries. Ethan spoke first. "Mum, what happened at the hospital was unacceptable." She immediately became defensive. "I was trying to support my family." "No," he said calmly. "You were ignoring what Rachel wanted." Linda turned toward me. "I've always treated you like family." I finally answered honestly. "No, you've treated me like an obstacle." The room went silent. For the next hour, specific examples came out. The nursery, the name pressure, the surprise visits, the guilt trips, the hospital incident. Every time she tried denying something, Ethan confirmed it. For perhaps the first time in her life, nobody allowed her to rewrite reality. Eventually, she started crying. Normally, that would have ended the conversation. Not this time. "We love you," Ethan said, "but things have to change." Then he outlined new boundaries. No unannounced visits, no demanding access, no undermining parenting decisions, no guilt-based manipulation. Respect would be required moving forward. Linda looked genuinely stunned, as if she never imagined consequences could apply to her. When she left, she barely spoke. And for the first time since becoming pregnant, I felt like someone had finally chosen me instead of keeping the peace. The consequences weren't dramatic. They were natural. And somehow that made them more powerful. For several months, Linda had limited contact with us. Not because we punished her, because trust had been damaged. Relationships require respect. Without respect, closeness becomes impossible. Slowly, she began realizing something. Access to our lives wasn't guaranteed. It depended on behavior. When she respected boundaries, visits went well. When she pushed, visits ended. The rules were simple. For the first time, they were enforced. Meanwhile, my confidence grew. Motherhood taught me something important. Protecting my peace isn't selfish. Protecting my family isn't rude. And setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's responsibility. Ethan changed too. He learned that avoiding conflict doesn't create harmony. It creates resentment. Today, our son is 3 years old. He's happy, healthy, and surrounded by people who love him. Linda is still part of our lives, but the relationship looks very different now. The biggest change isn't hers. It's mine. I stopped apologizing for having boundaries. I stopped shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. And once I did that, everything changed. Because sometimes the most important person who needs your protection isn't your child. It's yourself. And when you finally stand up for yourself, you teach everyone around you exactly how they are allowed to treat you. If you've ever had to choose between family and your own peace, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama stories.